Hello, everyone, and welcome to the very first episode of Ottoman Encounter interview series. My guest today is Christina Ståhle, and we're going to be talking about her novel Before He Was Red. The novel is set in Istanbul in the summer of 1876, which was a time of uncertainty, war, social unrest, and deep political crisis in the Ottoman Empire. The book revolves around the relationship between Abdülhamid before he was Sultan and a Belgian woman named Flora Cordier. I was particularly interested in Christina's book because it invites us to think about and see Abdülhamid not just or simply as a historical figure, but as a young man before he became Sultan. Thanks to Christina, I had the pleasure of reading an advanced copy of the book before it went into publication, and I'm very much looking forward to talking about it in more depth with her today. Christina is a political scientist, and she pursued a career in international affairs before she became a novelist. She is also a graduate of UCLA's professional program in screenwriting before where she wrote 6 screenplays, and Before He Was Red is her first book. Christina, welcome, and thank you very much for being here.
Thank you, Dua. Very nice to be here.
It's a pleasure. So, I want to start from the very beginning and ask you how the book came about, because not many people actually know this story between Abdülhamid and Flora. I certainly didn't before you contacted me about the book. So I'm curious about how you came across that story and how you turned it into a historical narrative, basically.
Well, so it's a true story.
Hmm.
And I found the seed to the story in the biography by Joan Haslip. It's the biography of Abdulhamid II. So he's the Sultan who became known in the West as the Red Sultan, red as in bloody. And in the biography, there was just sort of a brief mention of Flora's and Hamid's secret marriage in 1876. And soon after that, he deposed his brother to take the throne, and she vanished. And no one really knows what happened to her. There are a few rumors, but really nobody knows. So that's how I came across the story.
Okay, but and how, like, what made you interested in the story? What made you interested in Abdul Hamid in the first place, that you wanted to read a biography of him? And then what made you interested in Flora's story? And how did you decide to turn that into a novel? But
Mm.
yeah.
Well, see, I can't even remember how I came across the biography. I think I was given the book and I just read it. And I just sort of read through it, not expecting very much. I sort of expected to flick through it. And then I came across this mention. It's really just a few sentences. And I was just very immediately captivated by it. Um, so I have as you said, I have a career in international affairs, and I also have a degree in screenwriting. And so I kind of love large epic stories with large scale historical change, like Dr. Zhivago or Gone with the Wind or The Leopard. These films, and I just love those. And I think that that's what I immediately saw in this little story. It's the intimate story in the sort of large scale historical change. And and I did end up writing the screenplay.
Hmm.
So I have the screenplay, and I have a version of the screenplay, but not unsurprising. It's sort of ambitious for an unknown screenwriter like myself, who's not in the film business, to sell as a first screenplay an epic feature film that will cost millions to make. So I decided that a better bet to get this to an audience was probably to just write the book, and which is what I did. And I kind of think that the result is quite cinematic. So I still think it would make for a great film or a great TV series.
So it started as a screenplay, and
Yeah,
then you
yeah,
turned it into a book. That's
yeah,
interesting. Okay.
yeah. And what I liked was the sort of epic potential of their love story. And when I read about their love story, when I discovered who Abdulhamid was, because I hadn't quite known about him before, I just saw his character arc in a flash quite immediately. And yeah, it might be funny to hear, but I sort of saw his arc, not him, but his arc as the arc of Michael Corleone in The Godfather, as a man who first rejects his family and the family's violent ways, but then ends up at the head of it, really fully accepting the horrendous person that the role requires him to become. And The Godfather is a film that I very much like, and I kind of saw that arc for him. But then in The Godfather, I never quite believed that Michael's wife, Kay, would have remained so passive in the face of his
Mm.
character transformation. So she just stayed and remained in love, more or less, to the end, and she stayed. And the little that I knew about Flora, that she was really bold enough to build a business alone in a foreign city that she didn't know. And she was really shrewd enough to navigate both Istanbul, um, European, and Ottoman societies. And she was courageous enough also to initiate this relationship across the boundaries of her world. And it was a relationship that probably most everyone would have opposed. And so that all of those things suggested to me that she would have been sort of a very uh, independent woman, and definitely independent enough to make her own choices. And at the same time, I would have imagined that, knowing what I know about Victorian society for women and how it constrained women, I could also imagine that she must have had a difficult time as a single woman alone in Istanbul,
Mhm.
and that she really had to live up to the highest moral standards. And to do that, she would have had to really suppress large parts of her personality, as women had to do at that time. Her sexuality, for one, she would have
Mhm.
had to suppress. And also knowing, well, given who she was and that she had come all the way to Istanbul, also her hunger for adventure, I think, that she would have to suppress. It was not very ladylike, maybe. And so I could imagine that somebody like Flora would have hungered for a kind of freedom from all of these constraints, and that really interested me. Also, that sort of drew me to her character. And at the same time, about Abdulhamid, we really know him a lot more about him. He turned out to be this yeah, the Red Sultan. He paranoia, secret police, the Armenian massacres. He had eliminated all his enemies after 33 years of reign, and he had also played the European powers against each other and remained on the throne for a very long time. So he, played a very cunning game. Um, and But when they fell in love in 1876, was that really the man that fell in love with Flora and who fell in love with her? And that really interested me also. So all of this I kind of was attracted to quite very early on as I read these few sentences about their relationship. And so what I knew about him was that for for a great part of his adult years, or many adult years, he'd been sort of locked up in the golden cages,
Mhm.
the cafes. He hadn't really been allowed out much of the palace at all. So the golden cages where the royal heirs were kept to prevent rebellion, prevent them from rebelling. And he had no political experience, I think, and he had limited possibilities to study, and he'd had very limited contacts with the outside world. And then at that time, there was the state of the empire as well. which when he took the throne, he must have already heard that people called the empire the sick man of Europe, for example. And he might even have heard people whisper about collapse. The empire was very heavily indebted by that time. It was hemorrhaging territories in the Balkans. Russia was preparing for war, and the European powers were taking and grabbing what they could. So, what very much interested me is how much of that did Hamid feel in 1876? And did he feel that if he would step up and become Sultan or take the throne, would it be a little bit like being the captain of a sinking ship?
Hmm.
And were there moments when he just wanted to escape the pressure of it all? And so I thought that it's not hard to imagine that just like Flora, he also dreamed of freedom to be, just himself. So these things attracted me very much to the story, which so I saw it not so much well as a love story, but actually I think more beyond that. I saw it as two people who um, who thought at some point that nothing was inevitable, or feeling despair. If you are despaired and feeling cynical, it's like knowing what the future can and cannot be, as if it is inevitable. But I'm not sure that that's what they felt at that time. And I think that in the present time when you're living, you decide a little bit what the future will be. And that's a bit how I understood their love story, that what attracted them to each other wasn't just the physical attraction or the curiosity, but it's really that their meeting allowed them to glimpse a possible future, maybe a future that hadn't quite seemed accessible to either of them before, and where they could be sort of free of the roles that society had assigned to them in very different ways. And so that's the story that I sort of came to, and that I think I saw quite quickly when I these few lines about them in the biography.
That's great. One thing that just popped in my mind while you were talking about it is the idea of contingency in history, because we usually read history through the present side. I mean, what I mean is like we look back and then say, oh, this happened and this happened and this happened. Um, but in that story, the other possibilities are fell through the cracks of history, basically. So, and as a historian, I sometimes think about or have to think about what would have been if um, things had gone differently, or what other possibilities were there in that moment for the historical actors, which is interesting to consider, um, because we think, looking back, that a lot of things were inevitable, but they may not have been, especially in that moment. So it's interesting that you took that idea and turned that into a story through Abdülhamid and Flora's life stories. I mean, we don't know much about Flora, obviously, but yeah, it's a good thought exercise to see or to think about what would happen or what could have been, what could have happened. So yeah. Um, the other thing was about Flora being a strong character. I think your story has a lot of women, like strong women characters. Flora is one, and then the other one I think of is Perestu, Abdülhamid's stepmother, who is the main supporter of Abdülhamid in the imperial harem. Basically, you want to talk about her a little bit?
Yeah, I so I should say that all the main characters in the novel are real life characters. So Peresto is Abdülhamid's stepmother and very much a real character. And well, I love all of them. I can't say that I like one more than the other, but I really love Peresto.
Okay.
she 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 became the last valide of the Ottoman Empire, I think,
Mm-hmm.
and it's through her eyes that I explore the harem,
Mm-hmm.
and so that was really interesting to
Mm-hmm.
me because that was a new world for me. Well, the whole of the Ottoman world was new to me, but I came to the harem with all the ideas of what we in the West believe the harem to be, and thanks to, amongst others, Leslie Pierce's work, I know that you've done a blog on her book.
She's a great
Uh,
scholar, yeah.
Actually, a great scholar and just such a fascinating read. And the book, her the majority of her work, I think, is about the harem, the imperial harem in the 17th century. I
Mm-hmm.
think the 16th century perhaps as
I
well, but
think from 14th to 17th.
14 to 17.
Yeah.
Mm. So I kind of, and that is of course a particular period. That's why I'm mentioning it because it is a part of that period is the Sultanate of the women. So it's a period in history, in Ottoman history, where women had a very important role in the imperial harem. And I haven't come across similar work about the imperial harem in the 19th century. So I sort of inspired myself on her conclusions and her description of the harem, and then sort of assuming that not that much had changed. I mean, there of course had been some, but essentially a lot of the way that it worked was very similar to what she described. So that is so Peresto. That's sort of the setup that I gave Peresto to as an adult woman. And so that's how I invented or created her life in the harem. Um, but then her background, Bristol was, of course, a special woman in the harem in real life.
Mm-hmm.
She was, I don't know if you know, but she was adopted as a young child, as a very young child, I
I
believe.
didn't know that, no.
Yes, by, I think it's Mahmoud II's sister.
Mm-hmm.
So Abdülmecit's aunt. And she was born Muslim, and then she was raised as a princess then by the Sultan's aunt. And and so when Abdülmecit met her in his aunt's home, he fell in love with her. She was very young. I think she must have been like 17 or something. And he wanted to bring her to the imperial harem. And the aunt insisted that she would have another status position. So he would have to marry her, which was very rare.
Mm-hmm.
And so he became the Sultan's first legal wife. She became. And in that sense, she never came in as a slave. So she came in and lived there as his wife. Um, she was also raised a princess, so she was very well read. She was very intelligent. She yes, so she I think she was a bit of a unique personality, strong, intelligent woman, and then who built her power base within the harem's constraints. That is, that she could leave the harem, but in a very constrained way. And so the way she does it, I describe it in the book. She grooms women who have worked for her for strategic marriages. She manages networks of influence across the empire. And she plays factions, domestic factions, against each other to protect Hamid's claim. And that is really her role as the mother of a prince.
Um,
And yeah, sorry.
yeah, that's a great point because Leslie Pierce in the book, and the book we are talking about, in case anyone is not familiar with, is called The Imperial Harem. It's a great book,
This
highly
one.
recommended. Yes, there we go.
Yeah.
It's a great book. Um, one point that she makes in the book is the fact that, especially after the, well, late 16th and early 17th centuries, as the as Istanbul or the Topkapi Palace became more and more of a center of government, and these small princely households all gather in Topkapi Palace because they were not sent, the princes were not sent out to the provinces anymore. She argues that the bond between, and when the principle of open succession was abandoned, and then the eldest male heir would assume the throne, became the norm. She makes the point, Leslie Pierce makes the point, that the bond between father and son was kind of broken, and it was replaced by the bond between son and the mother. So the bond between son and the mother became the most important dynastic bond, and we see this with Perestu as you portray her, because she is Abdülhamid's closest ally, as you said, in the harem, and that's very. I mean, I really loved the fact that you emphasize that in the book, because it just dispels the myth that like Ottoman women were secluded in the harem. They had no power, or they had no influence outside. All these classic tropes. So when you read the novel, you get the sense how influential the Ottoman women could be in the harem. So I really appreciated that about the book.
Yes, and what I sort of also, because she's mentioned also in Abdülhamid's biography, of course, and what I found interesting about her, and I sort of read it in between the lines in the biography, is that Abdülhamid remained very attached to his biological mother, Tirimuygan. Not sure I'm
Mm.
pronouncing that right,
Yeah.
Tirimuygan. And although she died when he was very young, she died, I think he was like 9 years old. And what interested me was that on the one hand, Perestru's role is to preserve the dynasty, and that is to she knows that Hamid's uncle Abdulaziz has gone more or less insane. She knows that Murad, the crown prince, is too weak, and he's also drinking too much, and his nerves are not strong. And so that would sort of leave Hamid to take the throne and to save empire and dynasty. And so she needs to put him on the throne. But at the same time, she is herself not able to have children, so she has adopted two children. Doesn't have any children of her own, and she would have competed for Hamid's love with his dead mother, and I think that is probably quite true, and that must have been very hard for her, because he always did keep her at arm's length, even though she was so loyal and so supportive of him. And I found that was very interesting, and that she had to make a choice at some point where maybe as a loving mother, she would have maybe even let him go to pursue another path. But that is not what she did, at least not in my novel.
I want to transition into something that as I said, found really interesting, which was Abdülhamid as a historical, as a novel character in the novel. I mean, I'm an historian, I'm a historian of the late 19th century Ottoman Empire, so I come across Abdülhamid a lot in my research or in my readings. But I always see him from a distance, right? I always see him as a historical figure, and most people do, actually. So, but when you read the book, you see a different side of him. You see him not as a sultan, well, the book's title even alludes to that, right? Before he was read. So maybe actually you may want to talk about that a bit. Like why did you choose that title? Because it's a really interesting title, and what does it mean for you?
Well, I think that the novel is really about the period before he was read, so before he became a sultan.
Hmm.
And so it has to do about this thing that we were talking about the fact that you as an historian or I as a writer and the reader even may know what his future becomes, that he becomes the Red Sultan. But in 1876, he didn't know that. To him, he still, as we were saying, he still had options. And, I thought that his marriage to Flora would be sort of a sign, or maybe not proof, but a sign that this was one option. It was to choose another path. And Hamid doesn't know how his future will become, and and um, and I found that was the most interesting point in the story that drew me into writing it. And so it's that point in the fork in the road where he's still deciding what to become.
I mean, yeah, in the book you see him, as I said, not as a sultan, but as a human being. Like
Mm.
he has his fears, he has his doubts, he has his anxieties, um, and you sense that he feels that burden that he wants to get rid of, but he can't. So it was very interesting to see him portrayed that way. I mean, some people may not agree with it. Some people may agree with, like, that's obviously the case. But for me, like as a historian, it gave me the opportunity to imagine him in a different way. And how did you approach that? I was curious about that. How did you construct him as a human being, basically?
Yeah, I think it's Henry Mantel has said that we can know what people did, but we can't with any certainty know what people thought or felt. And so that is what the novelist does. We try to imagine that, the interior drama, we try to imagine that. And that's what I tried to do with Hamid. So I had the fact that he'd spent at least 9 years, I think, in the cafes or in the Golden Cage, the political turmoil of the empire, the circumstances of his accession. I know that he secretly married Flora. But what I wanted to know and what I found interesting was what did it feel like for him from the inside? What did it feel like to be sort of an intelligent man locked up in a golden cage for years on end, not knowing if you would ever get out? Because remember, he was third in line for the throne. He wasn't really not immediately, he could have spent a whole lifetime locked up, actually. Because after his uncle, his brother would have become Sultan. And, Hamid might have been a very old man by the time that he, if ever, took the throne. Or what was it like, to sit locked up in the palace and witness the disintegration of the Sultan and the humiliation of the Sultan and of the empire? And then it is said that there was a prophecy saying that I think it was in 2 years he would become invested with the sword of Osman. So, you know, what does it feel to hear this prophecy, knowing that for him to become sultan, his uncle and brother would have to die? And and what would it be like for him? A 600-year-old dynasty, um, a huge empire with so many people dependent on the dynasty and on the ruler. when people start to talk about collapse. And and also, what I also found interesting was that so I asked all of these questions. All of these questions were things that popped into my head. And and then, we also assume that when a person is offered a chance to take power, he will grab it without thinking twice. But is that always true? You know, it's maybe not always what we want, that power. And so I think that my luck, I came to him as a human being, and it wasn't so hard, precisely perhaps because I'm not a historian, and because actually I hadn't come across Abdülhamid before, and so I got to know him the other way around. So I really came to him through his relationship with Flora Cordier, and then through his upbringing, through all of these life constraints. And so that really made me imagine the man before I really could get to know him as a historical figure.
Um,
And
do
yeah,
you
so
would you
that's,
what I'm hearing is like, correct me if I'm wrong, but you almost used him and construct him as a character to deal with these big questions, like about power, about like contingency, about love, about responsibility, and what would a person, or what could a person do in his shoes. So, is that a fair assessment? Yeah.
yes. And to show this, actually to sort of, it's an example of, I think it's useful even for us today to really realize that the future is not inevitable, that it is in the present that we make the future, and that we do have options. And I think that that is, useful for any person to be made aware of.
Hmm. Another topic that I want to touch upon is when I first read your manuscript, I remember thinking to myself, okay, I mean, I didn't know you back then, so she did her research, which I was glad because some historical novels are not that great. Let's put it that way. But it was obvious that you did your research on the Ottoman Empire. Um, what kind of resources did you use? Like, could you expand on this a little bit?
Yeah, I did. I did. I read the biographies,
Okay.
the Haslip one, for example, and a very interesting one, another character we haven't spoken about, which is Arminius van der Rie, alias Rashid. Um, the biography is called The Dervish of Windsor Castle. And so that made a fascinating read. Um, then I read, various academic works, The Ottomans by Mark David Baer,
Hmm.
The Ottoman Centuries by Lord Kinross, Davison's Reform of the Ottoman Empire. So Jason Goodwin, Lord of the
Hmm.
Horizons, and then Leslie Pierce's work, of course. And then I also, but the hard, so the so I to get the historical story of the Ottoman Empire, the political story, it's something as a political scientist that I'm quite used to doing. And so
Hmm.
this for me was I could structure that relatively quickly, and I could get a grasp of that relatively quickly. What's extremely hard is when you have so much rich history and you're telling a very concentrated story, and you do want to say something true about the collapse, but you don't want to go into, or the empire that is actually crumbling, but you don't want to go into all the details. Which facts do you choose,
Hmm.
and how do you depict those in a dramatic way? And that I can't tell you how many times I rewrote that to get that vaguely right. And the hardest part, what I found very, very difficult, was to find really little details about society in Istanbul at that time, but also inside the imperial palace. I tracked down some biographies about people who had lived in the palace around 1876.
I think you used Leila Saz, right?
Yes, I did. I did. And then there's a book called The Concubine, the Princess, and the Teacher, I believe. It's
That I
three
don't know.
women who lived in the palace.
Oh.
There's a book called The Black Eunuchs of
Mm-hmm.
the Imperial Harem.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's called The Black Eunuchs. Um, so yeah, I tried to find out details like, for example, if Hamid were to have dinner in the palace, who would he have eaten with? You know, in which room would they have been sitting?
Uh-huh.
Um, which dish would have been served first? At what time did he get his breakfast? Would he have breakfast alone or with the rest of the family? All of these things, and that's not easy to find.
That's
So
true.
I don't. Yeah, that's really, really. So I searched everywhere for those details.
That's true. Um,
And then, yeah, and then also I would read like novels on other crumbling empires, like
mm-hmm.
um, the Radetzky March by Joseph Roth, for
Mm.
example, about the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Um, and then I know you're going to be reading Orhan Pamuk's My Name is Red,
Mm-hmm.
because I tried to get it. I haven't lived in Turkey myself, and so I really wanted to know what does it sort of smell and taste like and feel like. And I find that Pamuk's it does that in a wonderful job at sort of
Mm. Mm.
getting those details. And I used tons of photographs from the 19th century to
That's
also get
interesting.
a feel for what things.
That's
Oh
very
yeah,
interesting.
like loads. Yeah, very very many. I use maps
Mm-hmm.
because, Hamid walks from one place to another, or they take a carriage ride. I needed to know how long time it would take, what streets they would pass, or roads or paths. So I would, to get. And then there is a very good podcast called the Ottoman History Podcast.
Mm-hmm.
So you can find anything there on relating to the Ottoman Empire, and so I would, also try to, especially to get to little details, I
Mm-hmm.
would listen to that.
I
Yeah,
mean,
that's
yeah, that's
that's some of it.
that's a lot of good research. So yeah. How did you then, to tag along with that question, how did you balance that need for historical accuracy and narrative freedom? Like, how did you do that? Was it difficult?
Yeah, it was very difficult, but and I think I sort of went also in search of people who had written historical fiction before me to really understand um, what my responsibility is and
Did
to
you
what
did you
extent.
did you visit the palace as well? Like, did you go to
No,
Istanbul?
I have
No.
not.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
I've been to Istanbul, but maybe 30 years ago.
Oh, okay. So not recent.
Yeah,
Okay, I see.
yeah.
Okay.
No, no. So it's a long time ago.
Mm-hmm.
But I have visited many times. I have like a room map of the palace
Mm-hmm.
with the disposition of all the rooms. I
Mm.
have all the pictures. I have
Mm-hmm.
people having written about it who
Okay.
lived there and so on. But no, I haven't. Unfortunately, I haven't been.
Okay. Yeah. Um,
I don't think I went even 30 years ago to the palace. I don't think so.
that's fine.
Yeah.
Um, and I mean, another good thing about the book is it definitely goes beyond the Oriental tropes, uh, which I know. I mean, we talked about this before recording, but um, that you paid a lot of attention to go beyond the Oriental tropes, not to portray the Ottoman Empire or the Ottoman world or the Imperial harem through an Orientalist gaze or the Western gaze from like looking outside in, and which I appreciated. So, you want to talk about that a little bit?
So this was also research that I came across when I started to learn about. So I read about Orientalism, and I told myself that it was not something that I necessarily wanted So I wanted to be really aware of that as I wrote, and so I particularly went in search for ways of avoiding those traps, the
Mm-hmm.
academic research, which showed maybe a truer picture of the Ottoman society. And and I think that the place where I really it's really in the harem where you see most of that in the book, and I really tried to show the harem as not this sensual, orgastic place, but actually really like a very structured political institution, which was really there for the continuity of the dynasty, and
Hmm.
where actually a majority of women and men lived in chastity and did not have sex at all. And yeah, and and also I kind of uh, bring it into the um, conversation in the European quarters, where a lot of the European characters really view the Ottoman world through the Orientalist eyes, which I think is probably true of the era that that was the case
Hmm.
for many. And so I thought that this was for me like an eye-opening and very very interesting. And so I very much enjoyed researching and writing through that lens.
So yeah, I mean, and that makes the book stand out, I think. So that's why I kind of enjoyed while I was reading it. Yeah, so that was definitely for anyone who picks up the book, that would be uh, a bonus for them because to see not just like cliches or tropes, but to see a different side of the Ottoman Empire and the Ottoman life and imperial harem, where, as you said, it was not about like sex, debauchery, or whatever. It was more about like power structure, institutions, competition between like different households in the imperial
Mm,
harem. So
mm.
yeah, that's that would be uh, interesting for the readers, definitely. Um, as we like wrap up, do you have anything to add for about the book, or what are you are working right now?
No, so I think you've covered a lot of ground.
Okay.
We should maybe mention the other main character, which we sort of, which maybe is the least developed, he gets the least amount of page space, is Hamid's half brother Murad.
Oh, that's true.
Yeah, and so he's another true real life character in the book. Um, and yeah, I sympathize with him. He faced very much, I imagine, a similar situation to Hamid,
Mm-hmm.
uh, but he was one step closer to the throne. He was the crown prince, and yeah, he must have felt the pressure too, because he did succumb to drink, and uh, and his nerves didn't quite. Uh, he he uh, he didn't. Yeah, I think he had a nervous breakdown
Mm-hmm.
when he got the throne. So he's a very endearing character. I also, I feel for him too. So that's maybe to be. Yeah, I feel for all the characters.
Yeah. Yeah. And are you working anything on new right now, or not really?
Yes, I am. Yeah, some people have said, "Oh, you have to write the sequel to the book. There's much more to write, and maybe one day." But I'm not going to do that now, I think. So I'm working on a European project. It's maybe I'm not quite sure yet. I think it's going to be a political thriller. So yeah, and it's going to be set in Europe in the 90s, I think. But that's just about more or less what I know. So
Okay.
I'm doing my research, and I'm
Yeah.
starting the writing the little snippets that you sort of use to build the novel in the end,
I think
bit by bit.
that's a good starting point. So yeah.
Yeah,
Thank you very much. This has been really fun for me. I hope it has been fun for you too, and
it has.
for our viewers and listeners. And where can the audience find you? Do you have a website, social media?
The easiest, I'm not a, I am. You can find me on social media, but I don't appear there very much. I have been saying for 3 or 4 years that I would I have a Substack account, and I've been saying that I will actually start doing something on it, but I have the account. The easiest is probably through my website, christinastale.com. I have lots of material there for those that are interested. I have further reading. I have details about the research I've done. I have a historical guide for those who want to some more flesh on the bone to accompany the novel. And I have a book club kit, which is quite substantial. So if anyone wants to discuss and think more about this period of time, then I have that. So that's probably the best. But I am also in Instagram at Christina Ståhle again, and I think I have some Facebook account somewhere.
Okay. I'll make sure to put these in the show notes or the Substack post that I'm gonna be creating, and our readers or our audience can find you and your book. Here it is again.
Yeah, here it is.
Yeah, there we go. So thank you very much again for Christina, and thank you for the audience for listening to us, and I will hopefully see you next time.
Thank you so much, Dua. It's been a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Thank you.